Hello YouTube, this is your favorite YouTube channel in beautiful, bright Hunglish language. Today we have a quite rare and interesting 19th century military rifle on our table. And I'm pretty sure that you already heard about it, but I'm also sure that you have never ever seen it in action. But you are lucky because Capandball is here for you to present the two-block model 1842 Augustin Jägerszutzen rifle, including the short introduction of the Austrian and Hungarian Jaeger troops of the 1848-49 revolution.
The two-block is an interesting concept. It uses a 1.5 cm long and 3 mm thick brass tube with percussion compound instead of a percussion cap. It is still a muzzleloader, and today we consider it as a wrong decision compared to the traditional caps, but in the middle of the 19th century it was a valid alternative. The key promoter of the method was the Austrian army, that planned to save the large number of flintlock arms on stock with an easy conversion. The two-block arm is not easy to shoot today, but it is not impossible. You need a bit of creativity to make these guns roar again. The star of today's show is an original model 1842 Jägerszutzen rifle that was made in 1848, utilizing a rifle barrel originally made in 1835. This was quite common in the Imperial Royal Army, as they were always short on money. The caliber of the rifle is 13.9 mm, and it is loaded on the forcing principle, meaning that the ball is loaded patched and it's larger than the bore diameter. The ball in fact is 14.1 mm, so with the patching this is really a tight fit. The powder charge is 3/4 quintal or 3.3 grams. The rifling is a dry vierteldrall, meaning that the bullet turns 3/4 in the barrel. Quite fast for a roundbore rifle. The muzzle velocity of this rifle was around 400 meters per second.
But before we move on, let me thank you for your support. Your donation through Patreon, buying our authentic Civil War cartridge boxes and cartridge formers, or our US Arsenal Stadias or 19th century rangefinders, or our rubber printing plates for Arsenal cartridge bundles all help to keep the quality of our channel high. So thank you very much again. Let's talk about the development first. The two-block rifle was invented by Giuseppe, a customs officer in Milan, Italy. He wanted to utilize his invention, the percussion tube, for artillery pieces. His first Zünder, or percussion tube, was a piece of straw loaded with a mix of potassium chlorate and black powder. His two-block system was patented in 1831, and the artillery pieces were converted in 1833. This was the first time, and it was a great success. So Console's system seemed to be a cheap and good method for converting the flintlock guns. The first guns to receive his locks were in fact model 1807 Jägerszutzen rifles of the 6th Feldjäger Battalion in Eger, now in Czech Republic. The first trials were held from the spring of 1835, and they were very successful. The converted 1807/35 model Jägerszutzen rifles performed very well. So later this year the Kaiser nominated a committee of 3 officers to examine the possibility of rearming the complete army with the Console's invention. A member of this committee was Vincenz von Augustin, a very important person in the later development of the two-block. But as you can expect in the Austrian army, not everybody was happy with the Console locks. Beroaldo Bianchini, the head of the arsenal, was generally against the percussion system, and he had strong concerns with Console's invention as well. First, he said that the cartridge can easily go off in the cartridge box as the percussion tube was attached to the cartridge with a little wire. Second, he said that the wires are too long, so they can easily get knotted in the cartridge box. He also said that if you shut the pen too fast, it will explode the percussion tube, which is dangerous. And he also stated that the explosion of the percussion tube is very close to the face of the soldier, which means that the fragments of the percussion tube can easily hurt the eye of the soldier. But the army did not drop the idea. But Bianchi's notes were important in the further development of the system. The project was took over by Vincenz Augustin, principal inspector of the handheld firearms and the artillery in the Viennese arsenal. His biggest challenge was to overcome the size problems of the locks manufactured by different makers. Although the army had central regulations on the sizes of the lock parts since 1798, the system did not work at all. The parts were not interchangeable. The console lock, however, needed an accurate fitting, as if the pen and the flash hole was not in line, the ignition became absolutely insecure. Augustin had to redesign the complete lock system, losing the opportunity of the conversion of the flintlocks, giving up one of the very first criteria, saving money for the empire. The console lock was better than the flintlocks, but the failure rate was still around 10%. After Augustin redesigned the lock, this dropped to 6%. This was clearly better, but still far from the desired under 1% ratio.
Augustin replaced the hammer and the lid. To prevent the lid exploding the tubes when closed, he integrated a free-floating firing pin called a zahn or tooth into the lid. This not only saved the percussion tube but also held it in place during the rough handling of the rifle. These modifications pretty much cured all the problems of the console lock.
So Augustin redesigned the percussion tube as well. He replaced the priming compound to a stronger substance called mercury fulminate in 1845. The first factory to manufacture the new primer was the factory of the KK Feuerwerkskorps in Wiener Neustadt. Another factory was established in Prague, and the army planned to open a factory in Pest in Hungary as well.
One advantage of the percussion tube was that it could be produced both by machines and both by hands if necessary. This was very useful for the Hungarian army during the freedom fights. The brass sheets are first rolled on a 2mm mandrel, and then one end is choked with pliers. Now we punch a 1.5mm hole for the wire. We fill the hole with roll caps. We choke the other end also. And we insert a piece of brass wire. The tubes were waterproofed by submerging them into shellac.
The new lock was made entirely on machines with interchangeable parts. The explosion of the tube happened in a closed space under the lid, and the ratio of the failure dropped to under 1%, as it was requested by the Hofkriegsrat.
It is always a good question when we are replicating the original charge of a military arm, what powder we should use. What is the equivalent of the 3.3 grams of Schießpulver, or fine shooting powder, used for the Jaeger rifle? I usually use Swiss powder for my experiments, as it is quite close in mixing ratio to the 19th century Austrian military powders, but I am always much less sure about the granulation. But this case is different.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the Hungarian Military Museum of Budapest, and I have a very special artifact in my hands, which I think you will be interested in. That's an original Lawrence cartridge, back from the middle of the 19th century. This is quite rare because you usually don't find these things, because they were fired, used in battle or for practice, or they were damaged and they were probably destroyed because they are made of paper. But this one is completely intact, which means it's in 100% perfect condition. And I have the chance to measure it, and I also have the chance to get some powder particles from that, which will be examined later by a laboratory. So we will exactly know what kind of powder they used and how to replicate that. So this is that's a very interesting research topic.
And we are quite lucky, because the Lawrence cartridge was loaded with the same kind of powder that was used before for the patch roundball Jaeger rifles. Here you see the original powder under the digital microscope. One fine line is 1/10 of a millimeter. And here is the Swiss 2F powder. The core size is nearly the same, but the original is a bit more polished, so we can be sure that the Swiss is still a bit stronger. But the match is quite good. And now we arrive to the first 50-meter group of the rifle.
Let's talk about now who the Jaegers were. Jaegers were the regular light infantry troops of the Imperial Royal Army. By the time of the 1848-49 revolutions, the army had 1 Jaeger regiment and 12 Feldjäger battalions, each organized with 6 companies of 202 privates, NCOs and officers. They were selected soldiers, although only 1/3 of them were equipped with rifles. If possible, the recruits were selected from civilians already accustomed in using the rifle, like hunters or members of city militias. The Jaegers, like the Grenadier troops, were the elite of the KK infantry. They received the training of the regular line infantry and later improved their skills with the Jaeger training. By the mid-19th century there were basically 2 types of Jaeger soldiers in the Austrian army. First the Schützenjägers, armed with the rifle, and the Karabiner Jägers, armed with the smoothbore muskets. Carabiners were 2/3 of the battalion. But from 1842 their rearmament began with rifles as well. The model 1842 Kammerbüchse, which is also a very interesting rifle and I will cover it for you in a later video, was issued to the troops. So by the mid-19th century actually there were 3 types of Jaeger soldiers. First, the rifle-armed Schützenjägers, second, the smoothbore-armed Karabiner Jägers, and third, the Kammerbüchse-armed Büchsenjägers.
The forcing principle was not uncommon in Europe to load the military rifles. The oversized lead ball was not especially hard to ram down, as the muzzle and the 7 grooves are formed to ease the starting of the ball. The grooves are deep, the lands are well rounded and polished. Now let's see the performance of the rifle at 100 meters. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the 100-meter group of the rifle, and I really have to say that I'm satisfied. It's a very cold day, but it's a beautiful day, but it's still, the group of the rifle is very good. I have 4 shots in the size of the 10 ring, and I only have 1 flyer. Well, this low shot here, this was caused by the misfire. I had to replace the cap. Probably there was some obstruction in the touch hole, but this is good. This is very good for 100 meters. Let's check it at 150.
Let me talk about the Hungarian Jaegers for you now. The 1848-49 revolution is probably the brightest star in the Hungarian history, but it is also quite an important conflict in the mid-19th century. In fact, this is the largest conflict of the 1840s in Europe, with 150-200,000 men armies operating in the region. That's a large number, ladies and gentlemen. The war was fought for independence from the Habsburgs, and basically it had 3 phases. The first phase was the Autumn War, with initial successes and then a long retreat and great losses. And then comes the Spring Campaign of 1849, with beautiful victories pushing back and beating the Habsburg army in all battles. And then the last phase was the Summer Campaign, with the Russian intervention, trying to fight both the 150,000 men Habsburg army and the 200,000 men Russian army. Guess what? We lost. But still we are very proud of these efforts, as the Hungarian army, the Honvédség, was completely newly raised army. Having regular light troops like the Austrian Jaegers for the Honvéd army was a critical question. But there were some important problems. First, there were no Feldjäger battalions that were recruited from Hungary, so the experience was missing. Second, there were never enough rifles or Jaeger equipment, so these troops fought with whatever they could find. Third, the Jaeger troops were organized by an officer who was quite creative with using the government funds. And fourth, we never had enough time to train the troops properly. The soldiers and the officers learned the essential skills on the battlefield. The organizer of the Jaegers was Norbert von Auffenberg, a former lieutenant of the Austrian army. In December he changed his name to Norbert Ormai to sound more Hungarian. He was a close friend to Lajos Kossuth, and he started serving in the Honvéd army as a captain with an irregular unit. He convinced Kossuth to organize Jaeger regiments in December 1848, and by the spring of 1849 1 regiment was already standing. And then he immediately started raising another 3 in Transylvania. Ormai was not really loved by his comrade officers, as he tended to seduce the officers and privates from other units with higher payment. This was completely against the mandate he had and also against ethics. He was also quite creative in spending the money issued by the government. He quit the Honvéd army on the 7th August 1849 and soon he was captured by the Austrians. During his trial, he tried to convince the judges that he was forced into the Hungarian army against his will. In contrary, the other generals of the Honvéd army chose death instead of trying to free themselves. He was hung on the 22nd August 1849. The Hungarian Jaeger troops were anything close to the Austrian counterparts. The complete uniform you see on me when I'm shooting the rifle was seldom issued. The tube-lock Jägerszutzen rifle was also a very rare bird. Civilian arms, caplock and flintlock military rifles were also pushed into service just to be able to give something to the troops. Altogether, most of the Hungarian Jaegers were anything but elite. In fact, they were just a bit more than Freikorps, much below the strengths of the line infantry.
And this is another shooting session from the rest, now at 150 meters or 200 paces. and that's 150 meters. And if I was satisfied at 100 at the 50, I really have to say that I'm satisfied at 150 meters as well. I have 4 shots, let's say, in the size of the black area, and although we are pacifists, we don't say that, but actually the black area on a normal pistol target is the same size as a human head. So I really have to say that this rifle can still shoot, still hit the human head at 150 meters or 200 paces, which is good for a military use. It's very good for a military use. I have one flyer here. This was also caused by a misfiring cap. I heard that the ignition was lower than usual, but otherwise it's good. It's good, especially with 4 shots. That's good. I have probably a human mistake here, a human error here, but whatever, it's good. It's still good. Next time we'll check the group of the rifle at a longer distance.
The equipment of the Hungarian Jaeger troops supposed to be the same as the equipment of the Austrian Jaegers, with some touch of Hungarian traditions, like the frock was changed to a pie grey Attila, but all the rest should have been the same. The most important item was probably the cartridge box. It was larger than the usual infantry cartouche and had wooden separators creating individual compartments for patch and ball, cartridges and spare bullets rolled by 15 pieces in paper. There were leather slings attached to the strap to hold the powder measure and the ramrod, as the ramrod did not have a channel in the stock of the rifle. The leather strap of the ramrod had to be so long that the Jaeger could be able to throw it over the shoulder when moving in combat. My box was made for my flintlock Jaeger rifle, so an important feature is missing. There should be 38 loops in 2 rows for the spare percussion tubes attached to the front, under the lid. Let me talk a bit about training and target shooting. Unlike in the case of the line infantry, of course, Jaegers focused more on target shooting. The training initiated with making the recruit understand the basics of shooting, like the proper sight alignment, the meaning of the bore axis and the line axis, the ballistic curve of the projectile. Kernschuss was the shot fired with the bore axis parallel to the ground, and Visierschuss was the shot using the block rear sight with the properly leveled front sight. Whatever the distance was, the Jaegers always aimed with the top of the post in level with the top of the rear sight. By the mid-19th century they never used the fine and the full sight alignments. At 100 paces or 75 meters the Jaeger aimed at the center of the enemy body. At 150 paces or 112 meters at the chest, and at 200 paces or 150 meters to the head. Between 250 and 300 paces or up to 225 meters to the top of the head. From 300 paces or 225 meters, they were using the leaf rear sight, because at that point the front sight and the rear sight was covering the complete enemy body. It was already understood that the pull of the trigger is critical for accuracy. The trigger was pulled with the last joint of the trigger finger slowly. This was practiced not only at the shooting range but at the quarters as well, so black spots were painted on the walls for dry firing. Often the NCO checked the progress. Ask the soldier to aim the unloaded rifle into his eye, so he can check the sight alignment and the trigger work. To check the proper hold, the Jaeger had to raise the rifle to his shoulder with his eyes closed, and when he opened it, the sights must have been in line. This was a very good control on the proper hold.
The Stutzen Jaeger had 2 options for loading his rifle. He had 72 paper cartridges in the cartouche holding only the powder with the percussion tube attached to the wire. So these were technically blind cartridges. The ball and the patch were carried separately in the box. These cartridges were mainly used when the troops were fighting in close combat order. Making the cartridge starts with rolling the paper tube. The diameter of the mandrel is ½ inch or 12.5 millimeters. Then we choke one end with the string and tie it. It's time to fill the powder. Now punch 2 holes for the wire. The wire is not only holding the Zünder to the cartridge, but also opens the paper tube when loading the rifle. Biting the cartridge is missing from the rifle drill of the Jägers of the 1840s and 50s. The patch was made of linen. It was lubricated with tallow, but applied only to one side that touches the bore. Let's see now the rifle drill of the Jaeger while loading with paper cartridges. Hauptacht. Man wird laden. Ergreif die Patrone. Zünder in die Pfanne. Schwenk zur Ladung. Patrone in Lauf. Ladstock in Lauf. Setzt und versorgt den Ladstock. Schultert.
Shooting practice was carried out at distances ranging from 50 to 300 paces in groups of 6, so the NCO can have a good control over each soldiers. The target was a 5 feet and 6 inch high body-shaped target, showing a human body with 2 black circular bullseyes painted over the chest and the head. The result was always recorded, so the Oberjäger could check the progress of the individual soldiers.
Macht euch fertig. Schlagt an. Fire.
Besides the static targets, moving targets were also suggested by the Abrichtungsreglement. These targets were pulled by weights in front of the soldier to practice how much the shooter had to aim ahead of the target to have the shot in the right place.
When the Stützenjäger was on skirmish duty, he was to load the rifle from the powder horn. For this purpose he had powder measure, 38 spare percussion tubes, and powder in the horn for additional 28 shots. Now this is the process of loading the rifle with the powder measure. The Jaeger needed both hands for the process, so he placed the butt of the rifle between his heels and he held it with the knees.
Let's talk about the tactics of the Jaegers. Many of us probably see that the Jaegers are all-time snipers or commando troops of the 19th century, but this picture is completely false. They were not that different from the line infantry as it seems. By the time of the muzzle-loading weapons, deciding the fight was only possible with closed combat orders. Therefore the Jaegers also had to master these skills. The Jaegers were rather an elite infantry than jungle fighters. Of course, they were more suitable for skirmishing or fighting the small war, but still, they were trained pretty much the same way as the line infantry was. There were minor differences, of course. So let's check now how these grey wolves actually fought. Let's start with the deployed line, as the most important for a firefight. The basic and most important close combat order was the 3-man deep deployed line of the battalion and the company. The Stützenjäger was the leader of the Rotte, the trio of the 3 men standing in one column. He was standing in the last row. There were 4 basic methods for loading and firing. If firing a volley, it was called Chargieren Gliederweise. The first 2 rows were alternating volleys in this case. When the soldiers were allowed to load and fire the guns in their own tempo, it was called the Einzelfeuer. General Décharge was when the Jaegers of the first two rows fired their guns simultaneously. This was only used in special occasions like on parades. Chargieren aus pelotons, or firing by platoons, was used often in combat. It was the basic fighting method when the unit was retreating. The next formation is the skirmish line, or forming the Kette, or chain. It was probably the most important part of the tactical training. This open combat order was most suitable for initiating the fight. The skirmish line was pulled in front of the closed formations. It has support troops as well, and reserves as well. The chain was built on the Rottes, led by the Stützenjäger. The 2 Karabiner-Jäger, or the Büchsenjägers, were in front of him by 3 paces, and the interval between these links, or chains of the chain, depended on the tactical situation or on the ground. But it probably averaged around 8 paces. The firefight was basically fought by the Karabiner and the Büchsenjägers. The Stützenjäger only fired his rifles when he had a sure shot. When advancing, the Stützenjäger ran forward around 10 paces and fired his rifle. The Karabiner or Büchsenjägers, when they were hearing the shot, they moved forward, ran another 10-12 paces in front of the rifleman. One of them fired the gun, but the other remained loaded to cover the work of the trio. When the rifleman finished loading, he moved up to his mates. The Stützenjäger was quite free in the chain. Depending on the tactical situation, he could utilize all the support the ground offered. He could, in fact, leave the link as far as 50 paces if necessary. The chain was vulnerable to cavalry charges. If it was attacked, 3 to 6 links rushed together in a bog called a klumpen and tried to move back to the supporting and reserve troops with defending in 360 degrees. The chain itself was pulled 300 to 400 paces in front of the closed formations. It has support troops at 150-200 paces behind the chain, and it also has reserves at another 100 paces behind. The work of the chain was led by 2 officers. One was standing just behind the chain, and there was another one who was positioning himself between the support troops and the chain. The work of the line was conducted by horn signals. The next useful battlefield formation was the square and the masse, invented just before the French wars. The mid-19th century Imperial Royal Jaegers also used the masse or closed column formation in cases where they had to move across open terrain. The masse was formed from companies and from divisions. Divisions are 2 companies merged together in a tactical formation, but never from the whole battalion. If they were attacked by cavalry, the massed squares were placed in checkered formation. So this was basically a defensive formation. It is quite interesting to check how they fought when they were forming the square. When the enemy cavalry charged these squares, all sides prepared with bayonets fixed. When the enemy reached 100 paces, the second row fired a volley and then immediately exchanged the rifle with the next row and fired again. If the 2 volleys were not enough, then the 3rd volley, the last volley, was fired by the first row, who were holding the rifle at the hip with bayonet fixed. But the load in these rifles was quite special, because it was 1 charge of powder with 2 balls to increase the stopping power of the shot. Now that's some interesting stuff that you don't see every day.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a double ball load. And I really have to say that I'm impressed because the two bullet holes are very close to each other from 30 meters. This was the distance which was the last volley before the cavalry charge reached the square. Which means that the bullets are not spreading. This is not like grape shot, this is not like Cartridge, this is not like a shotgun. But the stopping power, now that double, probably this was the real aim of this double ball load. I love it. It's a good experiment. I love that. Interesting. Interesting.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think it's an excellent rifle. A well-balanced arm, and although the Q-block was a dead end in the development of firearms, it is certainly a very interesting concept. So thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment and share this video if you like it. And if you wish to support us, then please do it through Patreon or by buying our products from our eBay store or from our webshop. All the links are in the comment section. So ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay cool and keep your powder dry.